つまりですね、ポケモンホームとソードシールドの間を行き来できるポケモンを、ガラル図鑑に登場するポケモンに絞ることにしました。
And so what that means for Pokemon Sword and Shield is that players will be able to transfer their Pokemon from Pokemon Home only if they appear in the Galar region Pokedex. So we were very careful. We spent a lot of time really thinking what the best selection of Pokemon to match the setting of the adventure would be.
So I think it's pretty safe to say that right now, most people are aware of the Pokemon controversy happening. But if you're out of the loop or have missed E3 announcements or anything, let's dive into it a little bit. On June 11th, during the Nintendo Treehouse Live, game producer Junichi Masuda confirmed that in the upcoming Pokemon Sword and Shield games, the National Pokedex will not be included. However, the bigger announcement was that, unlike any games before, Pokemon Sword and Shield will be the first where not every Pokemon will be available. So what that boils down to is that if the Pokemon isn't in the Galar region's Pokedex, it's unavailable. You can't transfer it from another game if it's not in the Galar Pokedex already. So there are just Pokemon that won't exist in these games. And this isn't a situation where there's going to be future DLC or updates or anything to put all of the Pokemon in the game. No, they're explicitly stating that the plan going forward is that future games will not have all of the Pokemon. They're only going to select handfuls for each region. Naturally, this information was kind of a big bombshell for Pokemon fans, and people aren't happy with it. Social media has been buzzing with people trying to get the attention of Junichi Masuda, the Pokemon Company, anybody who's involved with the new games to try and change their mind. What we're seeing is on Twitter, people using the hashtag #BringBackTheNationalDex. We have people claiming that they won't buy the new games when they come out. It's a mess. But what I want to look into today is why this decision was made and what it means for the franchise going forward. Without a doubt, this is the biggest Pokemon controversy I've ever seen, and I've been an active player since the Red and Blue days. I've seen a lot of people compare this to what happened when Gen 2 is transitioning into Gen 3. For those of you who are too young to have experienced that or maybe just need a refresher, when Gold, Silver, and Crystal era were ending, we learned that we wouldn't be able to transfer our Pokemon from the Game Boy Color games to the Game Boy Advance system and Ruby, Emerald, Sapphire. Now, at face value, these situations seem similar, but in actuality, there is a major difference. The first big thing is that technology at the time legitimately was a big issue. Generation 3 added a ton of content to the Pokemon series that we still see used today. The overhaul of the battling system, such as abilities, held items, and all of that, were completely changed to fit the competitive scene better. There were just so many changes that were made and so much content that was added that it genuinely would have been so difficult to transfer Pokemon from the older system of games. But the big difference is all of the Pokemon became available through other means. You couldn't transfer Pokemon directly from the Game Boy Color games, but because of Pokemon Coliseum, Pokemon XD, and then the release of Fire Red and Leaf Green, eventually every Pokemon became available in the third generation of games. No Pokemon were excluded like they're going to be in Sword and Shield and the series going forward. What I personally find so interesting about this whole situation is that for the first time, it seems like the majority of players are coming together to really look at Game Freak and Pokemon critically. I'm not saying that the big criticisms haven't existed before this scenario, but for the first time, a lot of fans are holding Game Freak accountable for their actions. Since this whole thing has blown up, there has been a lot more open discussion about previous grievances in other games that a lot of people have ignored until now. And that's what I think is really important to bring up about this whole situation. A large portion of Pokemon fans, especially those who are older, have been upset with Game Freak for years now and voicing their concerns and criticisms online. So what I'm trying to get at here is the reason why many fans are upset. While the tagline has changed since, for those of us who grew up in the 90s or early 2000s, the tagline of Pokemon was "Gotta catch 'em all." It was kind of really ingenious marketing here in the US, so that it was like, yeah mom, buy me all those Pokemon games, I gotta catch them all. And yeah, it worked. Even though that tagline is no longer used, it is so ingrained in Pokemon that every trainer's inherent goal is to catch them all. Because we're so familiar with all of the 800 plus Pokemon, if that Stunfisk or Volbeat or Tynamo are missing, then we know our collection really isn't complete, even if the Galar Dex says it is. The thing that upsets me is that no matter what, somebody's favorite Pokemon is going to be axed. I'm personally terrified that Mareep and Whimsicott won't be in the games. Something that's always been so great about Pokemon is that you can customize your team with all of your favorite creatures. Even if they aren't available in the initial playthrough, they have been available if you're transferring, trading, special events, that type of thing. But here, there's just going to be Pokemon that just don't exist in this region. Right now, we don't really have an indication of which Pokemon are going to be included in the Galar Pokedex unless they've been included in a trailer or live stream. So it's just really tense for a lot of people who are waiting to see if their favorite Pokemon is going to be in the game. While the outrage over the Dex Purge, which is being referred to by many as Dexit, seemingly came out of nowhere, discontent with Game Freak and Pokemon has actually been building up for quite a while now. Let's back things up a little bit. When the Generation 5 Pokemon Black and Pokemon White games released in 2010, many fans were actually outraged only the new Unova Pokemon would be available to catch in the wild during the main storyline. Obviously, post-game, all of the previously released Pokemon became catchable in one way or another. But this didn't stop a large amount of players from voicing their complaints and passing the game up altogether. Now, it's important to give credit where credit is due, and Game Freak really took the criticism to heart. The outcry, be it justified or not, was heard, and to hopefully increase sales and appeal to older players less reluctant to change, Pokemon from previous generations were available from the start of the sequel games Black and White 2. So what we have here is a situation where Game Freak does listen to the most vocal of its fanbase and makes a change to appease them. However, what's happened since is that Game Freak seems reluctant to branch out and to stray too far from the norm like they did with the Generation 5 games. What this has resulted in is a constant pandering to nostalgia we see in the modern Pokemon games. Hopefully you like the first 151 Pokemon, because they aren't going anywhere anytime soon. But let's be honest here, part of the fault for the overuse of Kanto content is because of fan pushback. Game Freak took it too far, but they were responding to the backlash against them. Basically what I'm trying to say here is that part of the fault for some of the issues that we have in modern Pokemon games is due to the fans. I don't think it's completely fair to put all of the blame on the game developers when they were responding to negative criticism. But what's even worse than the Gen 1 pandering and can't be excused by fan backlash is the seeming laziness in recent games, specifically from Generation 6 onward. Game Freak has a bad habit of adding cool new features and dropping them in future games. And before anyone jumps down my throat, this has always been a problem with Pokemon. Secret bases in Gen 3 disappeared, the underground in Gen 4 hasn't been seen since, dropped features are nothing new. I mean, look at all the features that have been dropped from the games never to be seen again. The reason I'm drawing special attention to the 3DS Pokemon games and their omissions is because there's notably less content altogether. Many quality of life features have been dropped and arguably replaced with worse features. For example, both the player search system in X and Y and the Dex Nav Plus in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire have been replaced, with arguably less user-friendly setups like the Festival Plaza. One of the biggest examples, and the one that personally hits me the hardest, is the exclusion of the Battle Frontier in the Generation 3 remakes. Fans were understandably upset that the most unique and challenging part of the third generation was cut. As a kid, I was too stupid to beat the Battle Frontier in Emerald, but now that I'm aware of how Nature's, EVs, and Ivy's work, I was excited to pick up the remakes and give the Battle Frontier a go. But of course, that didn't happen because the Frontier doesn't exist in the remakes. So why was the Battle Frontier cut? Get this. In an interview with Pokemon Millennium, Junichi Masuda literally says that, quote, "In simple terms, the Lotta Park has not been included because only a very small part of the players would have appreciated and used this feature of the game. The players get tired of the past and are not attracted by these demanding challenges." Note that this is translated from Italian, so Lotta Park just means Battle Frontier. The reasoning bugs me for a few reasons. The newer Pokemon games have progressively easy and hand-holding gameplay. The game obviously needs to be accessible to children, but recent Pokemon games assume that children are just stupid. You aren't allowed to explore and discover without some rival or NPC interrupting the flow of the game to give you basic information. The battle frontier is insanely difficult, but isn't that the point? Shouldn't dedicated players be rewarded? Not only that, but an optional post-game challenge may appeal to older players looking for a deeper level of gameplay that's missing in the main story. Secondly, the fact that they're cutting expected content just because it's hard and a lot of people won't go through the added effort is lazy. Let's compare these games to Heart Gold and Soul Silver. The remakes not only included everything from the originals, but they absolutely packed the game full of enhancements such as Pokemon following you in the overworld, the Pokeathlon, and even Game Boy sounds from the original games. In comparison, it kind of feels like the Hoenn remakes lack that dedication to the original games, and the respect of the players who had played them in the first place. And this isn't to say that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are bad games as a whole. No, they aren't. There are some really great features added, like riding Latios and Latias and the Pokenav Plus, both of which were dropped in Pokemon Sun and Moon, but to me, excluding the battle frontier is a major insult to fans and further reduces the challenge in an already simple game. A more topical example actually dropped after E3 in a Famitsu interview with Junichi Masuda. According to Masuda, not only are Pokemon being excluded from Sword and Shield, but Z-moves and Mega Evolutions are being dropped altogether. Now, dropping Z-moves makes complete sense to me, considering that they're largely specific to the Alola region, but Mega Evolutions definitely should be included. While some Megas are completely overpowered, many allowed previously unusable Pokemon like Beedrill and Pidgeot to have unique roles in competitive play. Sadly, the majority of Megas that we got are Kanto Pokemon, because of, the whole Gen 1 pandering thing. So there are tons of unexplored possibilities. And by the way, does this mean that Mega Stones won't be available at all, or does it just mean new Megas won't be made going forward? No idea. But either way, we can go ahead and throw them on the pile of scrapped content. The second update revealed Gigantamax, Sword and Shield's new gimmick that will most likely be dropped later for some other gimmick, let's be honest. So basically, Gigantamax boosts a Pokemon's battle power and changes their Pokemon's form into a new design. And get this, they use special moves known as G moves. So we have a gimmick that applies to only specific Pokemon, changes their design, and allows them to use more powerful new moves. Sounds super familiar, doesn't it? Kind of like, Z moves, Mega Evolution. Personally, I'm not really a fan of this new gimmick. Why not just continue making Megas instead of adding a new gimmick altogether? And how will this affect the balance of the metagame? Only time will tell, but so far I'm not terribly impressed. So you guys should be getting the point by now. And there is absolutely more we could get into, like mystery events taking over any special events, or the lack of post-game content in these games, lazy animations, excessive cutscenes. But let's move on. So to wrap this section up, what seems to be happening is that Pokemon games are progressively adding less and less content while simultaneously removing features from previous generations. For many fans, Dexit is the tipping point, and not something that can be ignored. Some fans are willing to excuse a lack of post-game or removed features as long as they still have that basic Pokemon experience. But as we're beginning to see more and more, Game Freak's questionable decisions are beginning to be noticed on a larger scale. Considering its impact and implications on the games, Dexit is by far the most visible issue, so it's kind of grabbing the attention of both experienced and casual players alike. Now, we need to talk about Pokemon Home for just a minute. A week prior to the Pokemon Sword and Shield Direct, the Pokemon press conference revealed Pokemon Home would be replacing Pokebank. Basically, Home allows you to trade and store Pokemon from Pokemon Bank, Pokemon Go, Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, and Sword and Shield. In the Direct, it is explicitly shown that Home works with Sword and Shield. Considering that you can use it to trade and store Pokemon from other games, the obvious conclusion is that any Pokemon would be able to transfer to any of the listed games. including Sword and Shield. Now, it's easy to say that it's the fans' fault for assuming something that wasn't explicitly stated, but one, the information in the direct implies this is the case, and it even plays on the player's nostalgia to frame home as something that will allow players to continue their journey with the Pokemon that they have transferred over the years.
And it will allow you to bring over the Pokemon that have shared in your adventures.
And two, previous comments from Junichi Masuda indicate that it was always the plan to make sure Pokemon could transfer to newer games. In an interview with GameSpot from October of last year, Masuda said, quote, "We're definitely always thinking of that kind of forward-moving functionality, especially since we've introduced Pokemon Bank. Now, up to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, you're able to store your Pokemon, and we know they're very important to everyone. I mean, obviously, people would be very sad if they couldn't use their Pokemon in a future game. So it does get a little complicated when you talk about the details, and we're still figuring it out. But we do have plans to find ways to let players use their Pokemon in the next game." End quote. Alright, so you might be thinking, plans change, and technically we will get to use our old Pokemon, just not all of them. So this statement isn't exactly false. And yeah, you're technically right, but look at this statement. In a Famitsu article from 2018, Pokemon Company CEO Tsunekazu Ishihara said the following regarding Sword and Shield. Quote, "The new title coming out in the second half of 2019 will be a completely different game from Pokemon Let's Go. It is not an entry game, but a game that we want longtime fans of the Pokemon series to look forward to." End quote. And then later he says, quote, "We want to make Pokemon fans say, 'This is what I've been waiting for,' by delivering a brand new product packed with gameplay elements and plenty of new Pokemon to encounter." With statements like these from Ishihara and Masuda, the anticipation for Sword and Shield was incredibly high. Based on their interviews, Sword and Shield were going to be the pinnacle of the Pokemon series. I mean, after all, according to Ishihara, this is supposed to be what fans have been waiting for. I don't know, to me it just seems so obvious that the pinnacle Pokemon game would include, maybe all the Pokemon? So fast forward to when the Sword and Shield Direct dropped on June 5th. Fans were understandably excited to see this game that everyone had been hyping up. And for the most part, the initial reactions were favorable. There's tons of potential for the Galar region to be incredibly interesting. The general attitude towards the 3 new starters were generally favorable, and Dynamaxing sure was a choice, but overall it looked like we would finally get a full Pokemon experience on a console. Fans were hoping that Sword and Shield would be a step up from the 3DS games. And after that direct, it looked like they were going to be. It seemed that the majority of fans were satisfied with what the games were shaping up to be at this point. But then E3 happened. More specifically, the Nintendo Treehouse Live happened, and we learned in the last 3 minutes of the nearly half-hour live stream, only Pokemon that appeared in the Galar Pokedex could be transferred to the new games. So not only is it looking like the Pokemon Home announcement was meant to intentionally mislead players, they tried to bury this important information at the end of a live stream where they knew less people would initially see it. The entire framing of the whole Dexit situation has been handled so poorly that it's honestly kind of baffling. Now, full disclosure, I do think that at some point there will have to be a limited dex. I mean, imagine a game with like 10,000 Pokemon running around, especially since Pokemon are now appearing in the overworld. It would be absolute chaos. But here's the problem. Sword and Shield are going to be the first main series console games, excluding Colosseum and XD because they're spin-offs. I think it's fair to say that for such a massive landmark in Pokemon's history, including all of the Pokemon is really important. Speaking solely in regards to the capabilities of the Nintendo Switch, the system would absolutely be able to handle the 800 plus Pokemon we currently have, as well as the 100 or so new Pokemon that will be added with Sword and Shield. Let's look at Breath of the Wild as an example. According to a Polygon article from 2017, Breath of the Wild, the base game without any DLC, takes up to 13.4 gigabytes of space. In comparison, Amazon Japan lists Ultra Sun is only taking up 3.6 gigabytes of space, meaning that there seems to be a lot of spare room for bringing back all of the Pokemon. In fact, the largest Switch game so far is NBA 2019, coming in at 32.7 gigabytes. So yeah, there's definitely room for all of the Pokemon on the Switch titles, as well as updated graphics, gameplay, and whatever. But obviously space isn't the only issue. For example, what about graphics? I mean, Masuda himself said that they wanted to focus on expressive animations and design over including all the Pokemon, so these games must be looking brilliant, right? So far, Pokemon Sword and Shield are shaping up to look okay, I guess. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing outwardly wrong about the way the games look, but where's the innovation? Has there really been any meaningful progress since Ultra Sun and Moon? Well, first off, I think it's important to note that Sun and Moon were made at a much higher resolution than what we see in the end product. I mean, think about it. The 3DS doesn't have a big screen, so it doesn't really need to render games in stunning detail. But that doesn't mean the games are created in that chunky 400 by 240 resolution. When you raise the resolution of a more recent Pokemon game on an emulator, the only things that noticeably seem like they need an update are the lighting and textures. Otherwise, the graphics look pretty good. YouTuber Simply Austin does an excellent job showing off the game's true graphics by increasing the resolution to 720p on the Citra emulator. If you're interested in trying this yourself, go check out their video. But side note and friendly reminder, like Simply Austin says himself, don't pirate Pokemon games to do this. Anyway, getting back on track, when we take into account the way that Sun and Moon were supposed to actually look at their full resolution, Sword and Shield don't exactly seem like that much of a visual improvement. Everyone's using this tree as an example, and for good reason. Look at this. I genuinely thought I was looking at something from the N64. For the games to be losing so much functionality for the sake of graphics and animations, this tree is ridiculous. And yeah, to be completely fair, it's almost certain that this will be fixed before release, especially with all the press surrounding it. I mean, when Spider-Man released, people were mad about Puddlegate, and I have no doubt that Pokemon fans would get more upset about this. But let's be honest here, the tree is the least of our problems. Look at how models suddenly appear on screen. Look at all of this empty space. Look at how lifeless the actual environment is. Look at this ground texture. This is supposed to be a landmark in Pokemon history, yet the game just looks like it lacks so much depth. Let's look again at Breath of the Wild. There was obviously so much heart that went into the game's design and animations. Game Freak, by contrast, looks like they've done the bare minimum. And for a franchise as popular as Pokemon, this is blatantly unacceptable. But what about the Pokemon? Do they really look better than in previous games? No, not really. Most of them look nearly identical to what we've seen in the past. The Kanto Pokemon appear to be recycled from Let's Go, and the other models don't look much different than what we've seen in previous titles, if not exactly the same. Now, obviously creating models for all of the Pokemon is a gargantuan task, and surely creating them takes plenty of time and resources. And given this fact, it would be completely disingenuous to say that modeling isn't a tremendous task. However, what a lot of people seem to overlook is that Game Freak are not largely responsible for creating the Pokemon models used in the 3DS games. Instead, the credit really belongs to Creatures Inc. with the help of Takao Uno, who is the 3D art director for X and Y and thus helped create the 3D models that we're now used to. One of the common responses that I see to anyone that criticizes Game Freak is that they should be cut some slack because they alone have to make the models. But that's just not the case. The modeling is outsourced to Creatures, and they've made all the models for Generation 6 onward. To further clarify, the models for X and Y were essentially future-proofed. But what does that mean exactly? So obviously with so many Pokemon, it would be ridiculous to create new 3D models of already existing Pokemon for each new game. So instead, models are reused in future games when necessary. To supplement this idea, in 2016, hacker KazaWar found code in Sun and Moon's data. In this data was unused walking animations for every currently released Pokemon. Many speculate that having Pokemon follow the player was planned, but dropped at some point during development. But the official reason that this code exists in the game is unknown. Whatever the reason, we not only have models of every Pokemon, we have walk cycles of every Pokemon from Generation 1 to 7. And really quickly, there's something that we need to bring up regarding the controversy surrounding what appears to be reused Pokemon models in the Sword and Shield gameplay. It's important to note that Junichi Masuda and Shigeru Omori told Famitsu that the Sword and Shield models are made from scratch, not transferred from the 3DS titles. This means that the future-proofed 3DS models were cast aside and completely redone. Honestly, I'm skeptical about this, and I'm not really sure how to take it. I don't claim to be an expert in 3D modeling or game creation or anything really, because I'm not. But what I'm having trouble understanding is why did they make completely new models that look exactly like the older models? I mean, at that point, doesn't it just make more sense to use what you already have? If you are going to make new models from scratch, wouldn't you want to update them and make them stand out from the previous generation of games? Again, there probably is a valid reasoning for this that I just don't understand as a non-game developer. But considering that the 151 original Pokemon are already on the Nintendo Switch because of the Let's Go games, and they look exactly like their 3DS counterpoints, aside from, updated textures and shading, I think it's odd. And just to be very, very clear, I don't want to say anyone's lying here. I don't think anyone's lying. I'm just questioning the decision to keep the model static and largely unimpressive. I just hope that one day soon we can get rid of these current 3D models and their poses and everything, and maybe get back to something more lively like we saw in Generation 5. I don't know, a girl can dream. Now that we've talked about recycled models, let's look a little more in depth at the so-called expressive animations Masuda is so proud about. Something a lot of people have focused on are the Wingle's overworld animations that we saw during the livestream. While there are various Pokedex entries that reference Wingle's ability to glide, what we see in the Sword and Shield demo is a lifeless, dull, bland pose that Wingle's just perpetually stuck in. Second, we've seen plenty of examples of Wingle flapping in the anime and games, so this model just seems lazy. For those of you who don't see this as an example of laziness, let's check out a fix made by Reddit user Big Daddy Gorilla, a first-year 3D animation student. In response to so many comments defending Game Freak and using the classic "why don't you try doing it yourself if you're so good" argument, Big Daddy Gorilla did just that, and just look at this difference. If a first-year animation student can model and animate this in 24 hours all on their own, there is no excuse for professionals with time and professional-grade resources not to code something better into their engine. And this is far from the only example. Look at the battle animations. Look at Scorbunny using jump kick. At least that's what the text says it's doing. What we actually see is Scorbunny just doing its looped jumping animation. Jump kick's battle animation is just the same one that was used in Let's Go. And look at Yamper's tail whip. What is this? What is this? This is not an expressive animation. This is static, lifeless, boring. Let's compare this to the animations in Pokemon Battle Revolution, a game that was released 13 years ago. Look at how unique the battle animations are. Even more impressively, look at the animations for each of the Pokemon when they faint. It's been 13 years and we haven't gotten anywhere close to this quality in a mainline Pokemon game ever. So here's the big question. If some Pokemon are being excluded from Sword and Shield in exchange for better, more expressive animations, where are they? Because they're not in the overworld or in the battles. And that's probably where 95% of a playtime is spent in an average Pokemon game. So it has been speculated that camping will be a new feature in the game. A leak that has turned out to be pretty reliable so far said the following: camping is how you play with Pokemon now. You'll get 2 toys, a feather toy and a toy Pokeball, which can raise friendship. You can make curry, which will raise stats and friendliness. Assuming this is true, it could be that specific models and animations for camping are where the efforts are being focused. But I'm personally skeptical about this. Pokemon and Me required unique animations as well, but we still had all the Pokemon. Based on Game Freak's past of cutting corners and not prioritizing animations and graphics, I'm just not convinced that a feature like this will be so innovative and deep that the 3D modeling efforts would have to be solely focused on this specific feature. What we've seen in trailers and gameplay are only snippets of Sword and Shield. Is it possible that there is something so mind-blowingly awesome that the lazy graphics and models can be excused? I mean, probably not, because again, Game Freak's track record hasn't been stellar in terms of meaningful innovation, so I'm really not holding my breath here. So to bring this section to a close, Sword and Shield are looking lackluster, considering that we are losing expected content. If Game Freak expects their fans to compromise on so much, they need to show us the exchange for all the Pokemon is a meaningful one. As of right now, the decision doesn't seem like a necessity and looks more like a way to cut corners. So we've laid out why people are upset and some of the problems with Game Freak and the series as a whole, but what exactly could have been done differently to avoid the backlash? I touched on this earlier, but I think Sword and Shield were the worst games to test a limited dex on. Again, these are the first mainline games to land on a console, so the fan expectations were very high. It probably would have been a safer decision to include all of the Pokemon in Sword and Shield and announce later down the line they will start having a limited dex. This may have helped to get players slowly acclimated with the idea instead of suddenly dropping the bad news after a year of articles hinting otherwise. And just as a reminder, Masuda commented just last year that the intent was to allow transfers of players' older Pokemon in the new games, implying this meant all of the previous Pokemon. Fans had a reasonable expectation that all of the Pokemon would be in these games, and without any heads up, it's only fair that some fans are upset. Another option would be to release Pokemon as DLC if they aren't included in the game in the initial release. Now, fans wouldn't be wild about about this idea, but like we discussed, cartridge space isn't an issue. So it seems like a good compromise if developmental issues really did cause an issue and limited what the team could do. However, Masuda has stated that there are no current plans for DLC, and considering Game Freak seeming aversion to DLC in any form, we can only dream. But absent any big changes, the best solution in my opinion would have been to delay Sword and Shield. If resources really were a problem for modeling, then this would give the team added time to make all of the Pokemon available. I think the worst thing to happen to Pokemon is the one game a year standard that we've begun to see in recent years. Rushing out new games so quickly has resulted in shallow entries that exclude features and don't meaningfully change gameplay. I think most fans would be fine waiting for a game if it meant we'd get an overall awesome experience, especially now that Pokemon has moved to a more powerful console. To quote the wise words of Shigeru Miyamoto, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. In all honesty, there's likely no good way for them to please everybody, but the solution isn't to simply disappoint everybody because Masuda realizes that there are too many problems to solve without making huge changes that risk alienating more fans. Masuda's response to the whole situation just feels cold and dismissive of the fans' concerns. It's because of this reaction that it's unlikely we'll see any meaningful solutions in future titles. My fear is that Pokemon will continue this trend of excluding features and choosing simple solutions that don't challenge Pokemon or the fans in any way, and ultimately Pokemon will just become a shell of what it once was. Above all, the biggest problem has been transparency. If Game Freak had been open and communicative with their fanbase, it's likely none of this would have played out nearly as dramatically online. I talked about this earlier in the video, but this isn't an example of Pokemon fans mindlessly and suddenly turning on the game creators. Instead, Dexit is just the culmination of annoyances that have been building up over the years. Fans are feeling unheard, and the sudden loss of a complete Pokedex is a major concern for the state of the series going forward. To be frank, it seems more and more apparent that Pokemon is being placed on the back burner. Like, the team at Game Freak don't have the same passion for the game anymore, you know? Instead of daring to push the game to do new and exciting things, it's like the higher-ups and their best programmers would rather be working on something else instead. So isn't it interesting that in an interview with VGC in May, Masayuki Onoe, a programmer and director at Game Freak, explained that Pokemon isn't the company's priority. Gear Project is an initiative at Game Freak that allows developers to pitch their original ideas. This has spawned titles like Harmonite, Pocket Card Jockey, and Giga Wrecker. According to Onoe, quote, "There are two different production teams here, simply named Production Team 1 and Production Team 2. Team 1 is fully dedicated to Gear Project, while Team 2 is for the Pokemon operation." What that means is that Game Freak as a company is prioritizing Gear Project, which is Production Team number 1, more than Pokemon in general. We are always trying to create something that is equally exciting or more exciting than Pokemon, end quote. Game Freak branching out to new titles is undeniably a good thing for the company. While Game Freak has other titles under its belt, they are all completely overshadowed by Pokemon. It's understandable that the company wants to explore new possibilities and expand their IPs. Town, Game Freak's new RPG title set to release later this year, looks great. However, while the new entries are welcome additions, Game Freak needs to strike a balance, or Pokemon needs to be given to a new development team. Pokemon is the second best-selling game franchise in the world, just behind Nintendo's Mario series. While the success of Pokemon provides a nice safety net for Game Freak while they explore new titles, putting less and less effort into their star series is bound to have consequences, as exemplified by the Dexit pushback. As more information comes out about the Sword and Shield games, some people will take each new bit of info as confirmation that Game Freak is sliding into mediocrity. By contrast, some people see new stuff and get more excited for the games. The thing about these two reactions, they're both fine. Look, don't bully folks who are interested in the game if you are boycotting it. On the flip side, if you're excited for Sword and Shield, recognize that some people have legit grievances. And as long as the discourse is civil and no one is being harassed, people shouldn't just be regarded as toxic for having opinions on the game. In the end, these online conversations won't even matter. We will all vote with our wallets. Personally, I'm less concerned with Sword and Shield as standalone games, and more concerned for the future of the franchise, as I've discussed extensively in this video. To me, Sword and Shield look like generic Pokemon titles with little innovation and don't warrant a full $60 price tag. Now, on a positive note, there are aspects I'm looking forward to, such as the new gym system, the amazing human designs, maybe camping, some of the new revealed Pokemon, and so forth. But as of right now, I'm not fully sold on these titles, and I'm really not sure I want to contribute contribute to them if it means that this is going to set a standard for all future titles going forward. They may turn out okay, but that still wouldn't excuse all of the dropped features and what I see as laziness. Dexit, dropped features, poor communication from Game Freak, Game Freak's disregard for fan criticism, they all indicate to me that Pokemon is headed in a direction that I'm just not on board with. I hope Sword and Shield are amazing games, same with every game coming after Sword and Shield, but I think that unless we speak up about complaints that we may have, then we're just going to see bigger issues going forward. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening. I don't make YouTube videos that much. Typically what I've made has been for my student publication or for college classes, but I just graduated. And while I'm currently applying to grad schools and working, I actually have a lot more free time and I was going a little bit stir crazy, so I was like, let's make a video, and I guess this is that video. I've been working on it in between deadlines and it's finally done, so I hope you like it, or at the very least, don't absolutely hate me for making it. I think talking about Pokemon and where it is right now is really interesting, as well as Sword and Shield. So whether you agree with me or disagree with me, I want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Also, I'm a total nerd, so I've had a Twitter account for a long time, but I literally have just started getting into it this year. So if you want to interact with me for any reason, that's the best way to do it. It's at Emily Rubin, and it's linked down below in the description and on this little nifty video slide I made. The Pokemon avatar of myself that you see throughout the video is made by my very good friend and super talented animator and artist Angelina. If you're interested in seeing her animations, you can go over to her YouTube channel, Miss Random Dork, but she also posts a ton of her art on Instagram and Twitter at Angry Angie. And of course, you can go to her LinkedIn page, Angelina Moreno, if you want to see more of her as well. I cannot stress enough how talented and how awesome she is, so I'd really appreciate it if you go and at least show her some love. Even if you don't like my video, her art is fantastic. Thank you guys again for listening, and I hope to do some more videos soon. It is currently 3 in the morning, so I'm gonna duck out of here and go to bed. Thank you again for watching, guys.